All right. So you can give folks a few minutes to trickle in. Um, but yeah, let's get started. So hi everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Jaylani Owens. I'm the reparations coordinator at Law for Black Lives. And in this capacity, I'm also one of the coordinators for the Movement for Black Lives reparations working group. And so I just wanted to flag that we'll have ASL interpretation for the whole event. So folks who need that, definitely feel free to use it. So if you didn't join us for our Reparations June kickoff panel earlier this month, M4BL celebrates Reparations June, you guessed it, every June. And so we offer political education, like programming like this one, and just really try to highlight and elevate folks who are leading reparations efforts on the ground. So today's conversation is going to be focused on reparations for reproductive violence, which includes forced sterilization, abortion criminalization, perinatal mortality. And so these topics aren't easy. And so recognizing that if it becomes too overwhelming or triggering, definitely feel free to navigate the space in the space that you're calling in from with graciousness and care for yourselves. And also this program is going to be recorded, so you can also watch another time if you need to do that too. So I'm really excited about this. We have a really, really great lineup. So I feel like we can just get into it with Laura and Jennifer, both of whom have been on the ground securing reparations for survivors of forced sterilization in California, with California Latinas for Reproductive Justice and the California Coalition for Women's Prisoners, respectively. And so before I turn to them, I just wanted to do some ground setting for folks who just knowing that folks are calling in kind of from everywhere. And so basically just between 1909 and 1979, California non-consensually sterilized thousands and thousands of people under the state's eugenics program while it was in effect. And then in 2013, there was a report that revealed that these sterilizations never actually stopped and continued to target especially incarcerated folks in the state. And so in 2021, after decades of advocacy, the California governor announced that there would be a state program to compensate these survivors. And so for this first part of the panel, I'll just be in conversation with these lovely, amazing advocates, who I know will introduce themselves a little bit more in a minute, who've been impacted in different ways, and also been leading organizing and advocacy around compensating survivors. So thank you so much, both of you, for being here. My first question is going to be for Jennifer. So one of the really uphill challenges around reparations is this idea that it's not possible, so it's not worth pursuing or thinking about. And I've heard this in my work across issues, not just this one. And so assuming that this is something that you've heard too, and you've had like the weird looks of like, why are you doing reparations work? I just would be really interested, and I think people would benefit from hearing like why you got involved in this work in the first place. And just if there's anything that you want people who think it's impossible to hear, just to start us off.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and represent this amazing coalition of folks. I'm with, the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, but there's a broad coalition of people who've been working on reparations around this issue in California for many, many, many years. I'll just say, I agree. It's a really hard question. It's something that I doubt and go back and forth on and think all the time of what are reparations? What's the value of reparations? How are we defining that? As that's something that we consider across the state and across the nation. When I think of reparations, I mean, first, if we're saying, is it possible? Can we offer some form of compensation, some form of reparations, or maybe repair to people who've been harmed? California has proved that yes, you can pass legislation, you can set aside money, you can find at least some of those people, though it's been challenging, and we'll talk more about that, to offer reparations. But what I think is important is to acknowledge that reparations in this way is one step of a long process of repair. People were harmed, acknowledging that harm, ideally apologizing for that harm on both the state level and institutional level, and the people who did the harm and holding them accountable is incredibly important. And some level of financial compensation, if for no other reason than it's sort of the state, at least symbolically, putting the money where your mouth is and acknowledging it. And one of the panelists, unfortunately, hasn't joined us yet. I'm hoping she might be able to later. Moonlight, who has been compensated, Moonlight Polito, who's been compensated from this program. It's been so fascinating and awesome and amazing to see her get this small pot of money from the state that in no way repairs, the harm that was done to her, and see how she's taken that and invested herself and more time in sort of spreading this knowledge and bringing more people into the program and doing tremendous advocacy. And that's powerful, right? She's talked about one of the first things she bought with this compensation was a printer so she could print out more things to send to people inside. And that's really cool. And I'll just say what I find really challenging, thinking especially about people who are incarcerated, which is often what I've been involved in, is supporting people who were forcibly sterilized during incarceration, is this continues to be ongoing on so many levels, right? Tubal ligations have been illegal in California prisons for some time. It was redetermined to be especially illegal after it came to light in 2013, as was mentioned. But we know that tubal ligations have happened to people who are incarcerated as recently as 2020. We know that many, many people are sterilized by procedures like hysterectomies and oophorectomies and other procedures like ablations, that we don't have a way of understanding if those were fully consensual or not, what methods of informed consent were used, and that we will never know how many people in total have been sterilized without their consent. The numbers we have are incomplete, which is unfortunate. But beyond that, we know that people continue to be harmed just by the existence of prisons themselves, right? People have their ability to raise their children, to have children, to be in community with their family and parent the way they want to, disrupted by this system. So we need to really center that. When we talk about reparations, offering compensation is the first step, but we have to center things like abolition and think about how we support families more broadly, as the real goal, the real end game of repair and reparations.
Yes, thank you so much. So I want to turn to Laura. So right now, California's sterilization compensation program is approaching the end of its application period. And so for folks who aren't familiar, survivors are submitting applications for the compensation. And so that just requires sharing like documentary and other evidence that the state is responsible for their sterilization. And so I know that when we first talked, Laura, we had talked briefly about how the process has just been re-traumatizing for some folks as part of providing the evidence, and that it's also exposed to a certain extent some bad faith on the part of the state as it relates to like verifying the claims, and then some folks who definitely are survivors having that survivorship discredited because it doesn't fit into the really strict requirements that the state has put forward for the compensation. And so it would be great if you could elaborate a bit on that and some of the other like problematic aspects that you've seen so far with the compensation program.
Sorry, I forgot I was on mute. Yeah, I think that the whole thing is problematic for some of the reasons that I think Jen outlined, which is like, I mean, we believe in what we're doing in terms of reparations, and at the same time, no amount of money reverses the harm that was done, right? And so I think it's important to keep that in mind, but also I think it is symbolic, and it is important for the state to get and to understand the gravity of what was done by the state itself, right? And the harm that, it's not just to the person, it's a ripple effect, right? From the person to their families, to their community. And so I think addressing that is much larger. And I think what we have in this effort is more than just being able to give money back. It's also the opportunity to make people to help people to understand that this happened, right? I think in doing the advocacy on this bill, there was a lot of disbelief on the part of legislators and others that we spoke to, like, well, that didn't happen. What do you mean that happened? Within the last 10 years, yes, we're talking about this is happening. It has happened. It's happened historically. And to some degree, it continues to happen. And I think that, again, the issue of informed consent is really, in some ways, I feel like it's been a moving target, like to be able to prove what is, if someone had informed consent, right? for some of the folks that we've seen that maybe are not even included in this group, right? Because there were sterilizations conducted by the state in some of the institutions, the hospitals, mental institutions. There were sterilizations done in the prisons, but there are also sterilizations done sort of on county levels that aren't even addressed in this bill. And for example, for the Mexican women in LA County who were sterilized, they were actually, this was before informed consent was a thing, they were given papers to sign that were not in a language they understood. Now, you might even get the paper in your language, right? If you speak Spanish or another language, but if the medical or legal terminology is not such that we can understand it, what does that really mean in terms of what you have agreed to, right? And so I think that's problematic. I think that, the being able to find folks and the ways that the state sort of deals with reaching out to people or thinking about centering the experiences and proceeding with care to people who have been through this traumatic experience is really important and questionable, when you're talking about a state agency conducting this kind of outreach. And I think there's also I don't know that there's a whole lot of sensitivity really that's being brought to this experience. And, for example, one of the elements of the bill was to make sure that there were memorials placed at the sites of the places where sterilizations took place. And there's not, the community input on that is questionable too. And I think that that's really important to lift up, that it has to be the healing that has to be done really needs to be centered and led by the people who were harmed, right? And I think that in the work that we've done together, we have tried to incorporate folks as much as possible, but it is very, very, very challenging to do this work. But it is, I think, what we are being asked to do, like our ancestors need us to do this, right? Need us to do this and need us to put it forward as, yes, so we're asking for reparations. And beyond that, what does that look like? We need to have a real commitment to, maternal and infant mortality, questions around maternal and infant mortality. If we are really looking at, as we are trying to get the state to commit to looking at, racism as a public health crisis, then there is so much more around that, So I think those are all questions and elements to consider as we do the work.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It's such a beautiful answer. And so Moonlight, I'm so glad that you could join us. And so I wanted to turn to you quickly and just have you share a little bit. We've talked already about some of the problematic aspects of the program and also just why this program should exist. And so I just had wanted to invite your thoughts on either question as much as you're comfortable sharing. You're muted if you're answering. Let me see if I can unmute then. Oh, I can't.
Moonlight, are you able to unmute? Can you hear us, Moonlight?
I don't
Shoot,
know.
we can't hear you.
I know, I can't hear her. Christian, are you able
Moonlight, can you hear us?
Oh no, it looks like she's frozen now. For me, at least. Oh, okay. So our permissions are only that you can ask to unmute, but I think she's frozen. And so I don't know if Jen, you want to text her to let her know.
I did, but yeah, maybe there's some trouble. I'll let you know if I hear back from her.
Okay. Yeah, we can always come back to her. And so I would be happy to do that. But yeah, so while we're trying to figure that part out, I just wanted to thank you both again for sharing and just giving us a glimpse into the work that you've been doing. because I know it hasn't been easy. I know it's also been a lot of work for a very long time. And, just because some people are now, coming to it and might now see, the headlines, it doesn't mean that like the work has happened over like 6 months. And so I really just want to like acknowledge that and thank y'all so much for that. And so you're welcome to turn off your cameras for the time being. And so I just wanted to invite Urvaha and Lakia and Justice to turn their cameras on, with each of them representing Pregnancy Justice, Black Feminist Rants, and the Real Justice Network, respectively. And so at this point, just to shift slightly to talk a bit about pregnancy outcome criminalization, including voluntary and involuntary pregnancy terminations, and then to also talk a little bit more broadly about how anti-Blackness and misogynoir negatively impact Black people's pregnancy outcomes, including high rates of Black maternal, infant, and perinatal mortality, which I know we've touched on a little bit already. And so there's just less precedent, I think, for imagining and demanding reparations for these things, in part because I think until fairly recently, and even now, Black people, especially Black women, are made to feel as though these outcomes happen because there's something wrong with us. Like in my experience, at least, this shift to saying, it's racism, not race, that dictates these outcomes is fairly new. And there's still people, challenging that and saying, no, I do think there's something that's just wrong with Black folks, which is really awful and impacts the quality of healthcare and the quality of life that we have. And so I would love to start with just talking a little bit to you, Porvija, about your work. You've done an extensive amount of research over the course of your career, focusing on a variety of issues. And so what has your research exposed about just how Black women, girls, gender expansive folks are experiencing these pregnancy outcomes in the United States?
Yeah. So firstly, thank you so much for including pregnancy justice in this really important dialogue. It's a pleasure to speak and learn alongside all these incredible advocates and organizations. So at Pregnancy Justice, we conduct research documenting the criminal arrests as well as forced medical interventions on pregnant people across the United States. In September, we'll be releasing a white paper that documents all these criminal arrests pre-Dobbs. So I'm excited to share some of our research on pregnancy criminalization and what that exposes about what Black pregnancies in the US. So our research. During Roe, so from 1973 until the Dobbs decision, Pregnancy Justice has documented close to 1,800 pregnancy criminalization arrests across the country. So from Roe till 2005, we documented roughly 400. So from 2006 till 2022, we have almost 1,400 arrests, which is triple the number of arrests in half the time. And Black people and poor white people are disproportionately represented in our data. The majority of these arrests involve a healthy live birth. In fact, preliminarily, less than 5% of the cases involve an abortion. However, over 80% of our prosecutions come from states that have passed abortion bans, like Mississippi's 15-week ban that was challenged in Dobbs. So they're not just coming to attack abortion, they're coming to criminalize all pregnancy outcomes. The vast majority of these cases involve allegations of substance use, well over 80% of our cases, despite the fact that every leading medical and public health organization have statements that oppose punitive approaches to substance use during pregnancy, despite the fact that the science shows that no criminalized substance is an abortification, and no criminalized substance causes long-term developmental differences. So in addition to that, last stat, but over 60% of these cases come from states that either have laws in place or have laws that are interpreted to target pregnant people who use substances, and in turn charging these people with either child neglect, abuse, or murder. And while the majority of these cases involve allegations of drug use and come from states that criminalize drug use during pregnancies, these are not fundamentally substance use crimes. these cases are about how the carceral state, or using the carceral state to control pregnant people under the guise of preserving fetal health. And the history of pregnancy criminalization and the war on drugs shows how Black people are explicitly exploited in order to do this. So societal stigma against substance use allows state actors to open up these child abuse and murder codes and include language, fetal personhood language, saying that a fetus is a constitutional person without anyone batting their eyes. The stigma allows us to do that, or us, the state, not me, would never do that. When abuse and murder laws are not intended to control pregnancy in the first place. And when fetal personhood is on the books, what happens? It allows state actors to criminalize all actions during pregnancy. So we've had cases in clients who've been criminalized for illegal substances, legal substances, as well as these laws are expanded to any sort of risky behaviors taken during pregnancy, such as missing a prenatal appointment or falling downstairs. The anti-abortion movement relies specifically on fetal personhood to create the illusion that the state is trying to promote and protect fetal health, when it's really about locking people up when there's a public health issue. Which brings us to the racist war on drugs. So pregnancy criminalization as a widespread phenomenon emerged in the 1980s amid the sensationalized, racialized, and resoundingly debunked crack baby epidemic, which the anti-abortion movement armed themselves with it, and it created a perfect storm for them to move their agenda forward. And as I'm sure many of the attendees and the panelists are well aware, the war on drug plays on the racist and sexist stereotypes on Black women and their right to reproduce. So Black women were overwhelmingly the target of pregnancy criminalization in the first decades of this phenomenon. From our 1973 till 2005 study, the majority of the arrests were Black people. The more recent numbers indicate that poor white people and Black people are disproportionately represented relative to their population size. So from 2006 till Dobbs, white poor people are the majority of the arrests, but that is still to say Black people are very much overrepresented. This shift can be related in part to the recent drug epidemics and key demographic shifts, which Professor Kiara Bridges discusses in her latest law review on the opioid epidemic and white privilege. But the most recent opioid or drug epidemics involve opioids and methamphetamines, which are largely and widely used by white people. While there are a variety of different policy options that can be used to address substance use during pregnancy or substance use following the 1980s and the crack baby epidemic, the state has relied most heavily on the criminal justice system or the criminal legal system to address these disparities, in part because this phenomenon is racialized as Black. This racist model set for addressing substance use in pregnancy constrains all alternative policy pathways. And as a result, poor white people now are facing pregnancy criminalization at large. Further, these policies, which began as means of controlling Black communities, have eventually ensnared poor white communities with increased state investment and integration of police surveillance in social systems, such as healthcare. So overall, wrapping up, the pregnancy criminalization, our research shows it's rooted in anti-Blackness, disproportionately impacting Black people, kind of like the broader criminal system. And when a social issue, such as controlling pregnancy, is racialized as Black, the state will forgo all other alternative policy pathways and rely on the carceral system, criminalization, and surveillance to address the issue. Our research ultimately exposes how carceral approaches are strengthened by exploiting Black pregnancies. And this racist policy precedent has damaging effects for both Black communities and other marginalized groups. Yeah, that's our research.
Thank you so much. That was truly amazing. I'm like really, really grateful for all of your research and all the work that Pregnancy Justice I know has been doing to support folks who are experiencing criminalization in the ways that you named. And so I think that brings us really seamlessly to your work, Justice, as a doula, as a community organizer. You've prioritized supporting families who are experiencing this criminalization in their lives and their families through the state violence that like Child Protective Services, as it's called, causes. And so I would love it if you could speak a little bit more to how policing impacts pregnancy and parenting outcomes. I know we touched on it just now. And then also just why it's so critical that we're talking about family policing specifically when we're talking about reproductive injustice that Black folks are facing. Oh, Justice, we can't hear you. I see that you're unmuted, but I'm not sure. No. Mhm.
Now,
Yeah, I can hear you now, Justice.
okay. Thank you so much. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I can hear you now too. Apologies for that. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak and to talk about this really important topic. As a doula, and an organizer in this work and a leader of a reproductive justice organization, I hear it all the time from our clients, from our community members. I don't even call them clients, they're our community members, from our people who are afraid now that they are a birthing person, now that they're going to give birth, they're thinking about all of their experiences that they've had with the police. And it causes a great sense of fear, this heightened panic, because it is ultimately the job of all parents to protect their babies, to protect their children. And knowing that you're going to birth a child to a world that has been so unkind to Black and brown people really, really gets that heartbeat going. And it causes a lot of fear. We talk about family violence, not family violence, but policing families. I think we really need to ground ourselves in the historical fact that the bodies of all Black genders were under the control of white slavers at one point, and that we really haven't gotten away from that. We have been policed ever since we have been in this country. And now they have found ways to do it through systems that are supposedly in place to help us. Child Protective Services, and Department of Human Health Service, wherever you call it in your state, it's still a system that regulates families. And when we talk about, everything that was going on a few years ago with family separation at the borders, that is our story as well. Family separation is how we got here, being separated. And for, when we talk about reproductive justice, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between some of our community members. But I want to let everybody know that all of us, mages, marginalized genders, Black men included, were also under that, being that they were forced into chattel slavery. They were also sexually exploited as well, separated from their children and the ones that they loved as well. And we are closer to this issue with all Black folks, Black marriages, Black men than we ever could be with white women. Because of that particular exploitation that involves our race. And so the system is mimicking slavery. The system is breaking up families. The adoption system is, selling our children off to the highest bidders, in a sense. We are still under the whip in that regard. And we are fighting back as best as we can and protecting our communities as best as we can. But we are up against a system that has been here for decades, with this idea that Black and brown people don't know how to parent, that Black and brown people don't deserve peace or happiness or joy, and that our babies don't deserve joy or happiness and peace. And we are fighting against that because we, for the full autonomy of our own bodies, to be able to make these choices and to not be under the whip that we currently are under. This is a big issue. I mean, you could get a phone call, right? It starts with a phone call. And then next thing you know, your house is under some type of investigation, And I've seen parents, I've seen go through every single thing that has been asked of them, all the parenting classes, all of the drug testing. And mind you now that they have to pay for this. So it's not just, I'm going to go to this class, I'm going to get my kids back. I need to find out how to pay for this class. I need to figure out how to pay this system off. And it's quite disheartening. But we are a resilient people, and we continue to push, and we continue to fight. The work that we're doing to bail Black mamas out of jail is, in particularly, a fight against that system. Us going in and grabbing our people out and giving them cover and helping them through the process, because, we are not supposed to get, one of the things that people tell me, they say, Justice, I didn't even know y'all existed. I didn't even know that this was here. I've been suffering in silence over here because I didn't know that there was a community of care and support for me that I could go to. And that's exactly what we want to be. And we want to continue to create these communities of care and love and support. So our people know that they do have a place to go, that they do not have to be under the whip, that we can fight and dismantle this system together. And it is absolutely going to be hard work, but we are a resilient people, and we have come through for a reason. We have survived the Middle Passage all the way through for a reason. And I believe that it is our inherent right to reparations. Reparations now.
Thank you so much, Justice. I feel like every time that we've spoken, I've been moved to tears. So I'm gonna not cry right now because it's recorded and other people will see me crying later. And I don't want that for myself. But seriously, like, just thank you so much. And I just really appreciate everything that you've shared. And so finally for this section, I wanted to turn to Lakia. So part of your work, which is everything. Every time I say you're just working somewhere else with somebody else on something else. So your work has been in the realm of, I think, storytelling and like correcting the narrative around Black women, girls, and gender expansive folks, and how, we experience reproductive injustice. And so I would really love to hear from you, like, what do you think is missing from how people are thinking about these issues? That has, resulted in this divide that I think Justice talked about a little bit between this like reproductive justice space and then this reparations space, specifically for Black folks.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Jelani, for having me on this panel. And thank you, Justice, for bringing in the conversation of slavery. I feel like that is a perfect segue into the question that I was posed. So thank you for naming that. I think in conversations about reparations, most people can understand and agree with why the atrocities of slavery require reparations for the way that people's bodily autonomy was stripped from them and their labor was exploited. But oftentimes reproductive violence that Black people experience during the institution of slavery specifically is framed as a subsidiary or just part of the fallout of slavery, but is not centered as one of the worst forms of violence this nation has enacted on Black people. And I think that's all just related to misogynoir and the lack of respect that we have for reproductive labor. So reproductive labor is not seen as quote unquote real labor. So thus reproductive violence and reproductive exploitation is not seen as real forms of violence and exploitation when it is. And I feel like we definitely need to center the violence that Black women and people experience around their reproduction during slavery to have a full conversation about slavery. We can't just say people's labor was exploited without talking about the way that people were actually used as breeding grounds to advance slavery and to advance the slave economy and the slave population. Slavery would not have been able to continue to exist if Black women and people weren't being bred to continue the line of slaves after them. So I think that's one thing that's really important to note. And if people kind of had that conceptualization, they would understand why reproductive justice is inherently necessary in conversations about reparations. And even just thinking of the field of gynecology will forever be indebted to Black women and people for the violence enacted on us in order to advance gynecology. And it's really disheartening because Black women's bodies and Black people's bodies were mistreated, abused, harmed, violence was enacted on it to advance this science, and then that science isn't used for their descendants to advance their health. So Black people, Black birthing people are going into hospitals to become parents and have these babies, and they're not walking out of the hospital. So we endured all this violence, our ancestors endured all this violence to advance science and medicine, and then we're still dying on the tables. And I feel that specifically around the maternal health crisis, we've talked so much about the issues with the maternal health crisis, how this is happening, why this is happening. I don't think this is news to anyone. I'm personally tired of these large organizations talking about the crisis and not doing any of the work to address the crisis. I feel like it's only Black women and people on the ground who are saying, okay, we know the crisis exists, but what are we going to do to actually advance and get us past this crisis so that Black women, Black people can continue to exist and not die in hospitals. And so I definitely feel like, sorry, I was getting really into it and I just kind of lost, but we definitely need to be actually making the steps, and we need people who have the funds to be financing people on the ground who are doing the work so that the people with the most lived experience who know what needs to change can actually be leading that work. And so I feel like getting back to the question about what's missing is just like this acknowledgement of the real violence that Black women and Black people, specifically with uterus, experienced during slavery. And once we acknowledge that as real labor, as real violence, and not something that's just secondary to slavery, as one of the main components of slavery, and the only way that slavery would have continued to thrive as an institution, then we will get to understanding why they have to be wedded. Reproductive justice and reparations has to be wedded.
A word and a half. Absolutely. Yeah, especially I think in this moment where there's a lot of visibility, I think, on Black doulas. That's like definitely like, let's just throw Black doulas at the problem instead of being like, actually, this is systemic. So even if we have a 1-to-1 like doula to Black person ratio, which I would love, I love a doula from infinity to infinity. So you know, like there's still like a need for systemic change. And also to the point that you made about financing it, just because like, I know like doulas are the most generous people I've ever met in my entire life. But they shouldn't be starving to, you know, make sure our folks are walking out of that hospital. Like they shouldn't be homeless to make sure that we're walking out of that hospital. They shouldn't be homeless to make sure that there are Black kids, you know, in the future, you know, like none of that should come at personal sacrifice. And so I think that's where the need for, you know, compensation and beyond really comes in. So I'm really, really grateful to the three of you for all of your work. And I just think that it's really critical that people are expanding how they're thinking about these issues to acknowledge all of the nuances and additional perspectives that y'all have brought in. So yes, just thank you so much again. I did want to check in one more time with Moonlight to see if they're able to come on camera or unmute. You don't have to come off camera if that isn't something that you can do before we shift to the next section. So I don't know if Moonlight is able. I see that Moonlight's name changed, so perhaps Moonlight is. You're muted if you are talking, Moonlight. All right, I will check in, I guess, with Moonlight again after to see, and hopefully, I guess, like for the closing, that Moonlight can share something. But yeah, just thanks again to the three of you. And so you're welcome to turn your cameras off. And so I want to invite Janae Epps and Seisha Elmore into this space, representing Black women's health imperative and New Voices Reproductive Justice, respectively. So thus far, we've talked a lot about different, forms of reproductive violence and reproductive injustice that's impacting Black women, girls, and gender expansive folks across the country. And so you're both representing, organizations that are centering Black women, girls, and gender expansive folks daily, from like who's on staff to like your policy priority. Oh no, Moonlight, you're cutting in and out. I don't know if you can. Moonlight, we can't hear you. Yeah, you're like cutting in and out. Yeah, I can't hear you. You're like cutting a little bit in and out. Maybe if you turn the camera off, maybe. I can't hear. I see that Moonlight's connecting to audio. Moonlight, can you try to unmute again? No, it didn't work. Yeah, no, it's not working. Moonlight, can you hear us? Oh no, I think she's froze. Yeah, no, it's not working. No, you're still kind of cutting out. It's getting better, definitely, but I still can't hear you. No.
Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry.
Would you be able to turn off just the camera to see if that improves it? Like just the camera, not the mic. So just the camera. Let me see. Yeah, it's still not working. Do you want to try maybe maybe just logging out and logging back in, and then we can come back to you? Okay, cool. That works. Thank you so much for being willing to do that.
Yes.
All right, cool. So I'll go back to Seisha and Janae while we wait. So yeah, both of you are working with, yeah, I'm gonna see if Christian maybe can email Moonlight to see if we can have her on the call. Yeah, both of you are organizations that, oh no, it's still not, yeah, it's still not working, Moonlight.
Oh my goodness. But no.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we can try to come back to you after. And I'm gonna see if Christian can send you like a dial-in number from this link so you can just call instead of being on the app. I can't hear you, so I can't help. But are you able to mute now? And then we can send you the dial-in number.
Yeah, try to do it right now. Okay, I have a number.
Okay, I'll have Christian work on it. So just mute. So, and then when you get the dial-in, you can call back.
Okay.
All right, cool. And then thank you so much, Christian, for helping with that. I appreciate it. Zoom is just unpredictable at all times. So I appreciate also people hanging in there while we figure it out. And so just to go back to Janae and Sasha, to just talk a little bit about your work and what it means to like really be centering Black women, girls, and gender expansive folks day to day. I just think that it's rare that there's that like to really be with organizations that are doing that work daily, like whether, you know, the headlines are covering it or not, like whether it's like the sexiest work in the world or not, so to speak. And so I think that there's just so much to be learned from both of you about what it means to really center us instead of to treat like Black feminism and like reproductive justice as these like additive extra, you know, things you put on top of Black liberation, but instead being really, really central. And so the question that I have is for both of you. So whoever wants to go first is welcome to you. But transforming society for the holistic health and well-being of Black women, girls, and gender expansive folks are key parts of your organization's missions. And so reparations, I think, is also a framework that's concerned with, you know, holistic repair and also about transformation and addressing our conditions at the root instead of just trying to skim off some of the violence at the top, so to speak. And so based on your work and what your organizations strive to do, I would just love to hear, and I'm sure others would really benefit from hearing what you think is really necessary to transform the conditions that Black women, girls, and gender expansive folks are living in day to day.
Stacia, if it's okay with you, I'd like to go first. Okay, perfect. Again, thanks everyone for inviting the Black Women's Health Imperative and me as a representative for this panel today. Our organization's vision is that all Black women, girls, and gender expansive people will enjoy optimal health in a society that promotes health equity, social and reproductive justice. And so we promote the physical, mental, and spiritual health and well-being of the nation's Black women and girls. And we do that while also elevating the concerns and the inequities that impact Black women to the national stage. And we do that through a combination of science, advocacy, and action to eliminate those barriers that Black women, girls, and gender expansive folks face. And so we need not only access to, but the ability to build economic, social, and political power, not only for ourselves, but also for our communities, because we know that it is a continued struggle to navigate the systems that exist. And as these systems not only make it devastating for us to survive its harm, but it also impedes our ability to thrive in our daily lives. And so we cannot possibly make the necessary advancements to achieve optimal health until systems and policies are not only health promoting, but they are free of violence and harm in their operation. So with that said, we need more advances in health equity and social and reproductive justice for Black women, girls, and gender expansive people across their lifespan through an intersectional lens in policy, advocacy, education, research, and leadership development. And then also while inserting a reparations framework in all that we do. I know I'm freezing on the screen, so forgive me, but that was my response to that question.
Thank you, Janae, for getting us started. My name is Seisha Elmore. I am the lead organizer with New Voices for Reproductive Justice. And I did a lot of thinking around this question, right? So like when we think about transformation, we're talking about a shift, right? From one set of conditions to another set of conditions with the intention that what we've shifted to is for the better. So when I think about, or when I look at the experience of Black women, femmes, girls, gender expansive folks, I look at how this experience needs to shift in a way that benefits us, amplifies us, and centers us. And I also get to define like the role that I play in this overall shift. So my intro to the Repro Justice work was like organizing a march for the lives of Black women and femmes after yet another trans woman was murdered here in the city of Philadelphia. And so my righteous anger for the sanctity of our lives is what brought me to this space. I was like not even thinking about being an organizer, activist, or anything like that, right? I was just a foster parent at home, homeschooling in the early stages of the pandemic. But I was also watching the systematic annihilation of Black people and the righteous anger of the world. And so it was then that I realized that I only feel helpless because that's how they, like these systems that oppress us, want us to feel. And so I'm grateful to be able to have pushed past that feeling of helplessness to become part of this greater solution, which is to become part of this transformative shift, right? That is overdue for Black women and femmes. And when I think about holistic, I think about what are these natural solutions to address the whole body or this totality of our existence, right? You cannot have safe and appropriate housing and not have access to clean drinking water. You cannot have access to healthcare and not have access to culturally competent providers. You cannot have resources to support survivors of intimate partner violence, and queer people don't even feel safe or heard enough to seek help. So when I think about reproductive justice, I consider this to be that holistic shift that's needed to see and experience equity and safety in our lives. And so I think the obvious answer to what's necessary to really transform the conditions that Black women, femmes, and folks are living in is reform and even abolition of the systems that harm us, right? So the question is always going to be, how do we do that when the work feels so vast, right? And sometimes overwhelming. So New Voices for Reproductive Justice advocates for the complete health and well-being of Black women, girls, femmes, and gender expansive people. And so how we engage community is through organizing the most marginalized, right? Black women, queer people, disabled people, immigrant people, and those of us living at these intersections in order to build power, and being creative in our tactics and making the movement irresistible is also a part of this. Another piece to this puzzle, because it's all pieces and each piece is so devastatingly important, voter education and engagement, with the understanding that civic engagement is a tool, right? And not the tool to our liberation, but just yet another piece to this puzzle, but an important piece. And then also leadership development, right? Building our next generation of leaders and educating the community at large on reproductive justice and the ways that it impacts every aspect of our lives. So, little shameless plug, New Voices is launching an organizing cohort this fall to deepen this understanding and equip community members and community leaders with the tools they need to be a catalyst for this transformation that's needed to see true liberation in our communities.
Thank you both. Such powerful answers. Again, like every time I have a conversation about Repro, I just want to like cry, like in like the best way possible. So I appreciate that. It's cancer season. I blame that because I'm a fire sign, so I don't be doing that, obviously. But yes, thank you all so much. Both of your organizations have been really, really important in shaping my politic. I'm sure others, you know, feel the same way. And so I really just appreciate all that y'all are contributing to movement. And so I'm just like, especially, you know, happy that both of those organizations are represented. So just thank you. And so I wanted to, at this point, welcome all of our panelists back on screen, if folks are able and comfortable, just to start closing us out. And so to close this out, I would say that all of your work is aligned with one another, while all, you know, still occupying, you know, different lanes. And so repair, you know, looks very different in each of your work, I'm sure, as it relates to the folks that y'all are working with most directly. And so if y'all were to say, you know, this is what reparations, you know, looks like in my work, what would you say that is in just a few words? I know it's a big question, and like a few words is probably an intimidating task, but I trust y'all to do it. So whoever, you know, feels moved to share, definitely should. So yeah, I'll pass it to y'all.
I'll hop in. First, I just want to say that being on a panel with y'all is so lit. Like, y'all my heroes. Justice know I love her. And thank you, Lakia. Just I can go down the list. Thank each and one of y'all. I'm so grateful to be here. But I tried to just make this a short and a simple sentence, but I would say that reparations in my work looks like abolishing systems that cause us harm and reimagining equity and care based in the framework of reproductive justice.
I want to echo all those sentiments from like incredible happiness that I'm part of this conversation, to abolish, and to be more specific, abolish prisons, abolish jails, and abolish all carceral logics within healthcare. Yeah.
So we must have a check. We must have a check. We absolutely must have a check. But the check is definitely not the only thing. Without these systems of harm being destroyed, the check won't matter. We know of people in our communities who have lots of money, right? And the system is still there that will still beat them, right? We know that birthing people who have PhDs, right? Who have some money, have a little bit of coin, still have far worse birth outcomes than a white girl without a high school diploma. And so we must destroy the systems, the very systems that are destroying us. So until we do that, along with a check, that is a part of what I see, will give us some repair for what we have gone through.
I feel like Justice took the words right out of my mouth. I feel like you and me, we're right here, Justice. And I feel like your delivery is perfect. So I just echo what Justice says. We definitely need compensation as well as system level changes. I think as a human right, we're all entitled to healthcare. So we definitely need free healthcare, not only for Black people, but for everyone, because it's a public health crisis if people can't access healthcare. So definitely system level changes in our medical settings, as well as changes in our medical education. We need to be teaching providers in a new way. We need to be teaching them without all the biases around, racial biases and stereotypes, so that people can get the care that they're actually entitled to and deserving of, and not these preconceptions of them because of their race.
I'll jump in and yes to everything. Abolition checks, reproductive justice, like this is what we need. That's what it looks like. And I'll say in the meantime, in addition to that, I think the other thing I'll just add is accountability. I think we have a lot of not taking responsibility for both like the interpersonal, the systemic, the structural, the institutional policies and practice and procedures that we do every single day and that we have done historically. I want to see us doing that. I want to see healthcare workers like acknowledging their role in this and saying, I did that, that was bad, I'm doing better, I'm doing different, or I'm leaving this field. Like I want to see more people acknowledging that we have created this world. This wasn't an oopsie daisy accident. This was on purpose, going back to the time of slavery, and it's all of our responsibility to be changing it every day.
Yeah, I agree with all things that has been said. So I wish I could like do the echo effect that you can do on the iPhone for that and slam it. But I also would just add making the connections for everyday folk. I think sometimes we forget that, we may be in this work, but not everybody is. Everyone can't make that connection. And so it's up to us to help them so that way they can join the movement and we can be more of a powerful force. So making the connections through awareness, education, empowerment, and mobilization, while also taking transformative action in and out of the systems that exist.
Absolutely. So before we definitely close out, I wanted to give all of you a minute if there's any work that y'all are doing that you want to amplify. Like I listen to the Case podcast every day. So like if that's something that you want to bring into the space, feel welcome. But also just really want to make sure that folks can keep up with your work and throw down if y'all need them to. So I wanted to give y'all the space to do that, but like no pressure if you're like, I don't have anything, I don't want to do this.
I don't want to self-promote, but I realized I didn't really say earlier. I just wanted to, California has an ongoing compensation program for people who've been sterilized. If you know people in California who were sterilized historically, who've been incarcerated and think that something may have happened to them that shouldn't have happened to them, have them reach out. They can apply through December. Only 96 people have been approved so far. We know that thousands of people were sterilized and thousands of people who are still alive. So if you need support in that, you can reach out to California Coalition for Women Prisoners, but make sure you're spreading the word about this program so people get the money that the state allocated.
And I'd ask people to join in to our local reparations push. I'm honored that I was named as not a commissioner, but an advisor to the mayor's commission here in Kansas City. And we absolutely intend to hold our local reparations commission in great accountability. Reparations Now is the coalition, Reparations Now KC. We're also uplifting our film, bail and bonds, and pushing for a healing and empowerment center. And I want to remind everybody that June is the anniversary of reproductive justice. And so we are celebrating, we've been celebrating Pride, we've been celebrating RJ. We're going to continue to uplift, and reproductive justice is ours. It is ours. Let us not let anybody take it from us. There are all kinds of other folks who are now got reproductive justice in their mouths and they never, ever, ever, ever did before. So let's make sure that we protect what is ours. It came from us. It was given to us by us. Let's protect that. So we are going to celebrate in Kansas City. Look on our webpage, realjusticenetwork.org, to find out all the things that we're involved in. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice, per usual, because we had that conversation, but I was just talking about that today, driving home the point that reproductive justice is a Black women's movement. Do not be deterred or confused. But I did drop in the chat the IG for New Voices. You can follow us at New Voices RJ, as well as follow any upcoming job postings or events that we have coming up on our website, newvoicesrj.org. We are actually holding a virtual event for Black August, which will be August 24th, called the Legacy of Our RJ Liberation, talking about and highlighting and celebrating how reproductive justice is connected to Black liberation. So I would love if everybody could join us for that. I also dropped my email in the chat if anyone wants to connect with me about any of these things. And I mentioned earlier that we will be starting an organizing cohort in the fall.
So I also added some information in the chat for the Black Women's Health Imperative, our social handles, as well as our website. I would be remiss to not mention that we are celebrating our 40th anniversary. So we are doing a homecoming. So we'll be, stopping by some of the cities that have supported us in the 40 years, in which, of course, starting in Atlanta, Georgia, where our founding was on Spelman's campus by our founder, Billy Avery. So you can visit our website to learn more about our anniversary. We're going to be in Atlanta, Washington, D.C., LA, Detroit. If folks want to come out and support, it's going to be really huge. So, and again, thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me as well. I put my podcast in the chat. I have an episode with Loretta Ross, who's one of the founding mothers of reproductive justice. So check out that episode. It's really popular. Also donate to your local abortion fund. Access Reproductive Justice, who I have the privilege of being a board member of, is California's statewide abortion fund, and it is our 30th anniversary. So we are raising $90,000 to support people in California and the nation get access to abortion care. So when we talk about pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes, abortion access is super important. So please donate to your local abortion fund, specifically Access if you're in California, but wherever you're located, donate to your local abortion fund.
I don't want to be the last one, but I dropped in the chat a link to our confronting pregnancy criminalization guide that might be helpful for different stakeholders. You might be one of those stakeholders. Also, we are primarily a legal organization. So if you are looking for any sort of legal questions, we are the place to talk to and want to uplift everyone's organizations in this.
Thank y'all so much. Again, so for folks watching, we're not going to be doing a Q&A for this panel, but I encourage y'all to follow up in all of the ways that folks have said, to just tune into the work of these folks and also folks locally, because I promise people are doing it. And so, yeah, I'm just really, really grateful and feel really honored, honestly, to have been in conversation with y'all. This movement has had my heart since I was very young. And so it feels really wonderful to be able to talk about it in this way and to hear y'all talk about it in this way. And again, because it's cancer season, I just want to say that y'all just make me feel really hopeful about the future, and liberation is truly possible for our people, if not this lifetime, then the next. My kids will see it, and that's that. So yeah, just thank y'all so much for being here. Shout out to our interpreters also, because this is not light work, I can imagine. And so I'm just really grateful for y'all as well, and for Christian for holding it down with tech. I know we had a few issues, so also thanks again to everybody for holding on and messing with us while we figure them out. So yeah, thank y'all again, and yeah, I really, really appreciate it. So that's it. I hope everyone has a great rest of their night, or I guess their afternoon, depending on what your time zone is. For those of you who have a whole day left, go ahead. So yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.